Coming from the District of Columbia Public School Systems in Washington, D.C., is Miss Ashleigh Rose. Take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I am so excited to be here today, and I'm very nervous. But what I'm going to be talking about today is freedom as a practice in the library. And just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Ashleigh Rose. I use she, her pronouns. This is my 5th year as a middle school librarian. As Casey said, I'm at a DC public middle school. And before I was a librarian, I taught middle school ELA for 8 years in DC. That is where you can find me on Twitter or X or whatever you call it. And these are the link to my slides is at the bottom. And hopefully someone can maybe drop that in the chat as well. A pro tip, if you are not taking your school picture with a book, I highly recommend, because this year I walked into the office and our company that does our pictures literally made this poster for me without even mentioning it and sent it to our school. So highly recommend, just as an aside. But our agenda for today is this, and I will be talking fast, but the slides are available for you, and I'm always happy to chat all of these things. So we're going to think a little bit about why freedom. We're going to do some visioning and reframing what might scare us about freedom. And then we're going to talk through some practices to really support freedom in the library, where I'm going to give you some examples of how it looks in my space, and then some management tools and strategies that probably lots of you are already using, but I always find it helpful to just be reminded of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that like we have those things in our toolbox. So without further ado, why is the practice of freedom critical in the library? And so I want you to actually take a moment to envision a day as an educator. You're going into an upcoming pre-service day, and your partner said they drive you to work, but they were running late. And so by no fault of your own, you show up to the first session of the day 12 minutes late, and you go to sign in on the sign-in sheet and your name's already highlighted. And the facilitator of this session kindly reminds everyone of the norms to like be on time, please. And then you have to go grab your seat, and there's only one seat left, and you're like, PD bestie is on the other side of the room, and you get stuck next to this person that you don't really vibe with because they kind of complain the whole time. And then you realize you're sitting in a session you've actually taken 7 times, but everyone insists we got to do this session every year. And you wish you could learn something else, and you're thinking about all the things you need to do. Oh, and the person next to you is now going to be your PD buddy for the rest of the day. You only get 2 5-minute bathroom breaks, and they cut lunch short because we didn't quite meet the objectives. And then after lunch, you're like talking to your admin about your exciting plans for the first week of school. And they're like, ooh, actually, we have a scripted curriculum we need you to stick with. And so like the whole day, you're just feeling like you keep getting told what you're doing is wrong, and you don't have any choices in what you're doing. And that is a really terrible feeling that I'm sure we've experienced, but that is like school for many of our students. And so I think that the practice of freedom is so critical in the library, because our why is it can be giving, like providing freedom for kids during the day, right? In so many spaces, they get so limited autonomy and choice and control. And our space can be this like access to freedom and this access to things that they can't always get in other places. And that was really my initial why through thinking through it. And my why in hindsight, and my why that keeps driving me and why I'm excited to talk about this, is I know we all see those kids who are disinvested or have a fractured relationship with school not do well in other spaces in our school and then come into the library and thrive. And so the fact that I continue to have so many of my students doing great things in the library and showing like their brilliance and their intelligence, and like that they are fully capable human beings that can thrive and be successful, continues to drive my why in this work. And so I would like to take a moment to vision freedom in the library with you. And I think it's really important to begin with the end in mind. And so intentionally consider, what could freedom be in our spaces? And I usually do this work alongside students, right? So I would love for you to go in the chat actually and to answer just quickly some of these questions. in an ideal utopic society, like what does freedom in the library look like for you in your space? Take like 20 seconds to drop some what does freedom look like ideally in your space? And I'm thinking about the students that are my why, and like it looks like they're smiling and it looks like they're engaging like collaboratively with their peers, and like it looks like people are happy, right? Think about, what does it sound like? What are you hearing in your spaces when students have access to freedom? I'm hearing like these students be like, whoa, I didn't know I could do that. I'm hearing these students laugh, and I'm hearing them ask for help to their peers because they feel comfortable in this space being like, hey, can you help me like catch up on this thing, right? What does it feel like? Julie Stivers, I think, once said that like walking into the library should feel like taking a weight off of your shoulders. And I loved that. And that is how I want students to feel, like they can bring their whole selves into this space, and that like they are perfect the way they are, right? And so I think this is like this utopic vision of like, oh, libraries can be so great. But let's be realistic, right? Why is freedom so understandably scary for adults and librarians, right? Like when we hear the word like free time, especially like monitoring free time, somewhere that's maybe not the library, like why do we get anxiety, and why does our heart start to palpitate, and like what makes us feel like, oh, there are some challenges here, or like that's not really going to work here? Um, there are like understandable fears around this, right? Um, and I'm loving reading things in the chat. But this is what I ultimately find is scary about freedom. It requires us to be okay with not knowing what is going to happen. And that is like really scary, especially when you are responsible for young people in your space. But I really want us to reframe that fear. Freedom lets us all be inspired and surprised by our students daily. So yes, we don't know what's going to happen, but if we set up the right conditions in our spaces, students are going to show up in ways that are inspiring and surprising when we give them access to freedom in our spaces. And they're not just going to surprise us, they're going to surprise themselves, they're going to surprise their peers, they're going to surprise their teachers, they're going to surprise their administrators, right? Let's reframe freedom and try to make it less scary. And so, how do we turn the unpredictable nature of freedom into this inspiring, wonderful, freedom filled library that we just envisioned? I'm going to talk through 3 practices. And in each of these 3 practices, you're going to see, like on the slide, this little binocular, which is how it looks in my space, just to give some examples. And then I'm going to also give some management tools that we have in our toolbox that a lot of us probably use. But they're going to circle around these like 3 practices. 1, we will be proactive and explicit. 2, we will be responsive and we will iterate throughout the year. And 3, we will share the load with our students and with our community. And again, this is how I do it. I know there is brilliance in the chat, so I hope people will like share and give ideas around these as well. So be proactive and explicit. How does it look in our library at my school? First, it starts with explicit teaching, right? I start with orientation at the beginning of the year, and students are getting access to all of the different things we have in the library through a scavenger hunt. And I do a scavenger hunt to kind of be meta, right? To be like, you have freedom in this space. You can move around. You can start wherever you want. You can like collaborate with your peers. You can help each other find things. So it's meta in that like intentional experience of freedom, but it's also showing them, where are the signs that like help me figure this out? How can I find this thing? What if I want this thing? Where do I find this resource? And then anytime I'm rolling out something new or big, explicit teaching around how to use that thing or what that thing is. So I really opened up our makerspace this year. So I brought a lot of groups in to be like, this is how we use the space. This is what we do, to make sure that like kids really felt like they knew what to do. They knew they could go ask each other. They knew that like they have options and they're safe doing those things. Also, I continue to introduce options throughout the year that might be like smaller groups. So let's say I'm teaching like making skills. I might teach like a small group and then I've got experts there who can sort of share. So I did that with like latch hooking and I put up then this giant latch hooking project once I taught it. Or if I've got new materials or activities, like we got a bunch of Magic the Gathering cards. So I like did some teaching around that to give options or showing kids tech tools. And I think really making sure kids understand their options is important because the world is your oyster is really overwhelming when you're 12. And so making sure kids know what things are and us not assuming they know how to use things and like introducing them to ideas when they are excited about them. So that's how it looks in my library. Here are some management tools and strategies I use to be proactive and explicit. The first is having really intentional norms in my space. So you can take this candle link if you want, but my norms in my space are we take care of four things: yourself, each other, the space, and I explicitly name trust and freedom. Like I prioritize telling kids, like, I want to give you freedom in this space. Like you have freedom here. So let's protect that. And so at the beginning of the year, I give these four buckets, but then we co-create specific things that we will see, that we will hear if we are actually taking care of those things. And then I do a lot of shout outs and recognition when kids are doing a good job with these things. Sometimes we circle up when we're not doing a good job with them and talk about why. And then I also have a lot of signage that supports those norms and that supports sort of how we work in the library. The sign on the left really comes from teaching with love and logic, which I'll mention later. But it really is sort of like how we operate. There are reminders for like what to do so that I'm not talking all the time and I can point kids to that and they can self-manage and manage, help each other like exist and thrive in this space. So now we're going to move on to our second practice, which is be responsive and iterate. So how does this look in my library? Before I talk about how it looks in my library, I want to like give a specific note on cultural responsiveness. When I talk about responsiveness, I'm talking about being generally responsiveness, but I also think when we're thinking about freedom in libraries, it is really important to remember that as librarians in America, we are in a profession that has long been overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly white women. And so it follows that library norms have been a reflection of the values and the like priorities of white women. And so not everyone has experienced freedom in libraries or even experienced feeling welcome in the library. And so we have to reflect on our own cultural upbringings and values and preferences and biases when we are considering the priorities in the library. And so really asking ourselves, does this serve my students best? And I really put this reminder here because I think I'm always having to be intentional about like, am I supporting everyone in having the same level of access to freedom? Are we supporting every student in feeling free in this space, no matter how freedom presents for them, right? And am I allowing everyone the same level of autonomy? So I want to put that there in very intentionally, but also being responsive is like being recognizing like what is going on and then making changes accordingly and iterating. So in my library, first of all, there's like dedicated 100% free time. In my school, that works with recess, right? I have recess where like kids can come up and they can do whatever they want and they create and they make and they play games and they relax. And so I say you have access to freedom. There is a time during the day where it is like fully, you've got all the access you need to that. Because it might look a little bit different when I've got classes in the library and like your class is actually working towards an end goal, right? For you, it might not be recess. It might be after school. It might be before school. It might be like once a week during a specific time, right? Choice in flexible seating. I realized all of my kids wanted to sit on the floor all of the time, and we do not have a budget for like buying furniture and things like that. So I wrote a lot of grants to get a lot of bean bags and put them sort of all over the place so that they're wherever kids want to be. And then sometimes kids are like strange and, you know, I'm like, you know what? That is, you are upholding all of our norms. You're good. Sit in that box and play that chess. That's fine. I also give choice in activities and spaces, right? So kids have a lot of different things they can do. I've introduced them to all of those activities. So we've got puzzling and making, or kids like getting work done, or access to some devices, or playing a game, or being at our Lego wall, or, working in a study like area. I have a lot of signage. And the point of my signage is that it is really freeing to like remind kids there's no one way to be in this library, and to just like help them exist in the space and manage themselves and figure out what's going on. And so without having to approach me, if you're feeling really like shy, or if you are a person that's like not really sure about something, you're gonna see these things to remind you like, yep, you're good, keep on moving. I have to work really hard to limit the knee jerk, like, that's not gonna work, response. And so I work to be like, if a kid comes up to me and I'm overwhelmed and I'm like, not today, friend. I instead of being like, no, I try to be like, I can't talk about that today, but I'm free to discuss tomorrow. Or can you give me a plan for how that would work in the library and write that up for me and we'll chat that through? Or reconsidering if I realize something isn't making sense. I really have to work on being present and open-minded and not just shutting stuff down. So, being responsive and iterating, what are some management tools and strategies here? First, I'm always taking pulse checks, whether that is just like messing around with kids and seeing what they're excited about and like hearing and ear hustling, like, ooh, that's a thing I might be able to connect them to. But also putting up like passive ways for kids to give me ideas for the library or tell me what the library needs more of, or doing like a mid-year check-in on like, how are things going? What could we be doing? What do we not need to be doing? This helps me really like connect kids and decide like what sorts of things to prioritize. The other thing is that I always, and this is like comes from like classroom management, providing really logical and respectful consequences. So making sure that my consequences like make sense if there are consequences that are needed, and that they are not over the top and they're not stressing anybody out, but that they make sense. So like a student sneaks food on a beanbag and leaves a mess, the logical consequences, they need to clean up the mess and make a plan for what to do in the future if they're feeling hungry and need a snack. Or if a student is on the wrong website during computer time, a logical consequence is you might just need to do that on paper for today. Or if a student damages a board game, they need to repair the box, and we're going to have a quick restorative conversation to make sure we're all good. So making sure things match. And the last practice we're going to talk through is sharing the load. So making sure that you are not the only one managing all of this. And so how it looks in my library is kids are solving problems and kids are like creating the space. And so there's a lot of investment in the space. So there are, I'm displaying like student work and student artwork. When kids came to me and are like, you don't really use that bulletin board, we want to like do a mural on it. I was like, all right, make a plan. Let's figure out how it looks. And like, that is still pristine years later, right? Kids write a lot of grants in our library to get excited about our space. We had 2 manga books when I started at my library, and kids were the expert in manga. And so they like helped come up with like a list of series and wrote a donor's choose grant that we got funded. And they're a part of like deciding what books are going into my order, and prepping them for like cataloging and things like that. Investment in my space, I like love this one, is my library is in like what used to be a gym, and so it's loud and echoey. There are so many great things about it, but there was basically nowhere you could be in the library that was completely silent, because even if kids were talking at a normal level on the other side, you would like hear them on the other side of the room. So I had a lot of students advocating for finding a way to make a really silent space. And so we came up with this Zen Den. This was a before picture. This is the after picture. My students helped me design this space. They helped me write a grant to a local organization. And this is Eddie, one of our like big proponents of the space, like writing the welcome sign, and really like they protect this space with everything. I give kids a ton of leadership opportunities as well. This kids realized we needed a vacuum, so they like wrote a grant, and these were like my student library ambassadors who were like, yeah, they don't vacuum up here, we need to get a vacuum for the library, and don't worry, we'll manage vacuuming. I have kids dealing with like helping with like day to day, like making passes or taping manga books. When we had an author visit come, like I have students interviewing. We kids decided they wanted to do a Pictionary session like once a week at lunch, so they made a plan and we figured that out. Students decided they wanted to go to actually a feeder school library and set up a little free library, and so they made a plan for that. This Lego wall came from a grant a student wrote. Another grant a student wrote was to get us some more comics. And so when students start to see the other, I like really highlight these leadership things that kids are doing, and other kids are like, "Ooh, I can do a thing." That is exciting. You need this thing. You don't have this thing. Like, let me take that on. And so, what are some management tools and strategies? I do a lot of reflexive questioning. So instead of telling kids what to do, I ask them what to do. And so that really helps kids realize they can solve their own problems. And it helps with executive functioning, which all of my middle schoolers struggle with. So instead of telling kids, I'll ask, like, I hear the cleanup bell. What does that mean? Or what's important right now? Or what's the next thing you need to do? Or what do you think might happen if you do that thing I see you about to do? Or what do you need to make sure you do when you're finished with the desktop? Just to like get kids in the habit of self-management. Another tool that like, again, for my teaching days, and this really comes from this book, and this practice of like teaching with love and logic, is delaying the consequence. And first of all, I want to say I need to give consequences less and less in my space, the better I get at like supporting kids having true freedom in my space. Because like I don't find I'm dealing with as many issues. But because kids are like invested and they're self-regulating. But when something big does happen, and it will, first of all, I remind myself it is not about me and it is rarely about us. And so if something happens, I used to have this Q-tip up on my wall, quit taking it personally. It has nothing to do with me. I need to help this student like figure out how to self-manage and maintain their dignity and like keep our day moving, and make a learning experience out of it. So I will, if a kid is escalated or I'm escalated or like stressed as a result, delaying a consequence is often best. And so we are usually, a lot of times educators are hesitant to delay because they're like, I got to know the answers. This kid's going to forget they got what they did. And they won't forget that they made a mistake. And so what I'll do is give a genuine, like an empathetic one-liner, like, oh, that stinks. And if I'm not sure what to do in the moment, I'll be like, I'm going to have to do something about this. I am not quite sure what I'm going to do yet, but try not to think about it too much. Sometimes I add that in there because, funny enough, then kids think about it. And a lot of times kids come to me and say, hey, I made that mistake. Here's how I'm going to fix it. But also this allows me to go talk to like a buddy and be like, hey, what would be a logical consequence for this thing? To make sure I'm not overreacting or doing something like wild. I mentioned the term empathetic one-liners, so I wanted to drop some here. And this is kind of how I neutralize if a kid is trying to like argue with me, before I need to like delay a consequence. First of all, if you delay a consequence, there's not really much to argue with, but empathetic one-liners I'll use when like a kid is not in a good place. I'll be like, oh, that stinks. Or like, oh, that's a bummer. Or like, oh, I know how frustrating it can be when stuff like this happens, right? It's really important to do it without sarcasm, because sarcasm won't land well. So pick one that matches your personality if you're working on one-liners, but I'll use this and then say the like, I'm going to have to do something about this. I'm not sure what yet, but like, I'll get back to you. And so I want to wrap up here, by saying thank you for bearing with me as I went through all of those things so quickly. But I also think we have to start with ourselves when we do this work. And so I love this quote: no one of us can be free until everybody is free, from Maya Angelou. And it's important to note that supporting freedom always means we have to work on freeing ourselves as well. And so I am always working to shed what keeps me from freedom in my space, and to get rid of those things that I am holding on to. And so one place that I think is really good to start with this work is like really reflect honestly about what triggers you in your library. Go back to your norms. Mine are take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of this space, take care of trust and freedom. And then ask yourself, is that thing that annoys you or that thing that you try to control, is that actually violating those norms, or is it a me problem that I can let go of? For me, standing up and moving around like triggers me because in my classroom, there were a lot of times where that should not have been happening and like something bad might be about to happen. But in the library, I've told them that's fine for them to do. And if they're moving safely and they're fine, they're not violating any norms. And I have to like let that go. So thinking through that is a great place to start. And so, in closing, I just want to thank you so much for being here. And thank you for the work you do every day to support freedom in your libraries. I hope I can learn some strategies from you when I can finally see the chat. But our students deserve this work. So please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat. And I just wanted to add just a few additional resources. Again, they'll be in the slides. I'll redrop the link to my slides. But I love this self-paced course from Project Ready that I did with a PLN. Shout out to Julie Stivers again. These are some books that I read that like really make me think about this work. And this is my next read. But I hope this was useful. And thank y'all so much for your time today.
And you were nervous. Girl, please. Excellent job. Man, give us some love, y'all, in the chat. Oh, I enjoyed that, especially those one-liners, because see, mine are full of sarcasm and shade. So that's something I got to work on.
I always work on it. It is a constant process.
Yeah, and a lot of great ideas because I saw a lot of myself in your presentation, and then there were some areas I said, oh, I need to work on this, but I'm afraid of those bean bags because I'm afraid they're gonna start throwing it at each other. But I got to get off of that because I know that this is what the kids want. So that's a me issue I need to stop. So thank you, Ashleigh. Oh, I enjoyed it. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Give us some love, y'all.